Lake Michigan is an example of a freshwater aquatic biome. The freshwater fish and plants are able to live here because of the common characteristics formed due to climate. Climate is an abiotic factor that can influence an ecosystem as it changes. The changes in the water temperature each year are a result of global warming. As the weather and climate continue to grow warmer and warmer every year, Lake Michigan is affected by warmer temperatures as well. The thermocline is the temperature gradient of the lake, which can be used to measure how much temperature changes with depth. With this tool, the change in temperature can be noted as the deeper areas of the lake continue to warm along with the surface. Global warming is occurring because of the increasing amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The greenhouse effect is when Earth's atmosphere traps the sunlight and because of the contribution of carbon dioxide and other gases. Lake Michigan has another interaction with the atmosphere because of the water cycle. The water cycle is a continuous movement of water between Earth's bodies of water, atmosphere, and land. Lake Michigan plays an important role in the cycle as the fresh water is evaporated into the atmosphere and condenses to be released through precipitation. The benthic zone is found at the lowest levels of the lake, where sediment and are home to the benthic invertebrate community. The photic zone of the lake is where sunlight can reach and promote photosynthesis. The areas of the lake where sunlight can penetrate the water is close to shore and the surface of the lake, while the aphotic zone is the region of the lake where little to no sunlight can be reached. This zone allows less than 1% of sunlight to be found at these depths.
Knowing how all of these different organisms interact can be difficult to figure out, but through the process of ethology, or the study of animal behavior, researchers have been able to decipher, as Ashley stated, just exactly how one organism's behavior can affect its role in the environment. In the relationships between these varying organisms, it seems as though the organism with the best niche would grow exponentially. This would be true in a world that had unlimited resources, but this is unfortunately not so. Every species in their environment has a carrying capacity that they will reach when the organism's population exceeds the available resources in their environment. This more realistic growth of an organism's population is called the logistical growth. A factor that can affect population growth is nutrient limitation. When a population has their nutrients limited, as in their food, let's say, then they have a harder time trying to feed the entire population, which can cause a decrease in their own population. Another factor that can also affect the growth of a population is human population development. As the human population development grows, they have infested areas of wildlife with harmful chemicals, and they just destroy the general wildlife habitats with their expansion of building. The last factor that can affect a population here is a pathogen. If a pathogen comes into a population, it can wipe out either prey or predator, which greatly affect the growth of either population. The way that the predator relies on the prey and vice versa is an example of a density-dependent relationship, which leads back to the kind of growth that they have, which would be a logistical growth. The way that the pathogen affects the population is similar to the effect a pathogen would have on, let's say, a food web. A food web would just be relating how all of the organisms in this ecosystem work together. If a pathogen came into the ecosystem and took out the piping plover, then all of the other species, like the river otter and the American sea rocket, would be affected because what the plover eats and what is eaten by would have a change in their population and having a domino effect on what they eat / what eats them. In a food chain, however, it expresses the direct change in energy between prey and predator. Also, a food chain can be known as a pyramid of biomass because as the levels on the chain increase, there is less living tissue at each level. The primary producer in this case could be the American sea rocket because it produces biomass through its autotrophism, and it would also have the most biomass. As the levels increase, there is trophic efficiency that occurs, or also energy lost, in the form of heat as food is transferred through each level.
Within a community, there are populations of species which partake in interspecific interactions with each other through different modes. These populations are all reliant on a keystone species and all based around the first species in the area, the foundation species. Each different species has its own niche or preferred and ideal conditions. This makes it so different plants and animals can live together in one environment without too much competition for resources and living space. In the photo, there are 5 different species that inhabit the terrestrial biome of temperate deciduous forest listed. The ring-billed gull is a large bird that is characterized by a black ring around its bill. The ring-billed gull partakes in predation against small fish, worms, and insects. Another bird found in this area is the piping plover, an endangered species being protected in Michigan. This bird is threatened by invasive species in the ecosystem. Invasive species are plants and animals that immigrate to a new area that suits its ecological niche and often can overpower the native species with less species diversity with great success, since these species will have a hard time adapting around the invasive species. The American sea rocket is a plant that has fleshy, moisture-filled leaves to survive the dry habitat it lives in. The floating seeds of the sea rocket are dispersed by the winter waves on the beach. Other examples of interspecific interactions are mutualism, where both species interacting gains from the interaction, commensalism, where one gains and the other remains ineffective, and parasitism, where one species gain and the other is negatively affected.
The picture here of the bark of the birch tree is an example of one of the stages in the carbon cycle. The carbon cycle is the exchange of carbon through the biosphere, geosphere, hydrosphere, and atmosphere. The birch bark is about to return its carbon to the geosphere as dendrites, dead organic material, where the carbon will cycle through, eventually returning to the bark of another tree, like the one seen through the others here. In the case of the carbon cycle, the amount of CO2 produced in the photosynthesis is the gross primary production, or the amount of energy from light converted to chemical energy or organic molecules. How much CO2 is available to the ecosystem can be measured through the net primary production, which tells how much chemical energy is available to consumers in the ecosystem. The bird seen here is a male indigo bunting, a species of bird that partakes in migration, the seasonal movement from one region to another. This could be due to a biotic factor of a low food supply. When the temperatures drop, the insects and plants that the bird feeds on up north become scarce, leading to few options for food and what would become the competition within the population. Instead, the birds have adapted and evolved from their ancestors and with the cooler temperatures flee to an environment that will offer ample food. Behavioral ecology focuses on the evolutionary causes of variation in behavior among populations and species. Species of birds that feed off decaying flesh or human bird feeders will hang around, but the indigo bunting has adapted with each season to travel away to maintain a food source. Behavioral ecology helps explain why over time some birds have adapted to leaving the north in cooler times and returning as it warms, and why others stay continuously. In addition, the bunting also has such a distinct color because in their species, female mate choice is how the birds pick partners. The females choose the prettiest, brightest blue male as their mate. This in turn means that the bird can't use its coat to camouflage itself and blend in. Cryptic coloration, the ability to blend into the surroundings, is not seen in the indigo bunting. It is seen in the deer here, as the brown and white speckled coat matches the forest habitat.